Hi there, thanks for joining us today. We're really excited about today's session. We're going to be looking at the Dynamic AAC Goals Grid, and we're really happy to have Bethany with us today, and she's going to take us through the session. So she's going to cover some of the updates that has happened with DAG and this newer version, and she's going to talk a little bit about how we can use it as well. I just want to apologise a little bit for this recording. We did miss the first couple of minutes of the recording because I forgot to press record. So huge apologies, and it will kind of just abruptly start with what we've got when we started with Bethany. So I do apologise for that, but hopefully, or luckily, it was only a couple of minutes. So without further ado, I will pass on to Bethany.
Develop communicative independence and encouraging successful AAC use across the communicative competencies, as well as supporting goal writing. Folks that created this were Vicki Clark and Holly Schneider, who was an employee of Tobii Dynavox at the time. This was a partnership and a labor of love for them. They saw repeatedly that people were struggling to write goals for AAC, and they didn't know how to get people from here to here. And so they felt like this could be a tool that would be useful, and that's how the DAG came to be. Vicki is a speech and language therapist in Georgia in the United States. She is the owner of Dynamic Therapy Associates, and she is one of the AAC chicks on Facebook and Instagram. So if you ever get a chance to follow her, please do. She's just a really thoughtful and intelligent clinician with lots to offer. And we're just really thrilled to be able to partner with her. The original DAG was organized around two areas. One, it was organized around the communicative competencies that were identified at the time in 1989 by Janice Light. The linguistic competency, which we all know is syntax, morphology, vocabulary, literacy, etc. Operational skills, so the actual skills to be able to use a device functionally, like carrying it and turning it on and charging it and navigating. The social competency, which is using it in daily situations for a variety of communicative functions, and the strategic competence, which we know is the ideas or the techniques that you use for handling the intrinsic challenges of AAC, which include things like speed, vocabulary being unavailable, maybe misinterpretation of the speech. So that was one area around which the goals were organized. The other area was around the communication ability levels, which were identified by Patricia Dowden in 2002. And there were three communication ability levels: emergent, which were basically those who are at the non-symbolic level or beginning to use single symbols; context dependent, which are typically more single symbols into early syntax and morphology; and then independent. And independent is the one that often is misunderstood. Independent does not mean adult language skills. Independent means that the person is at age level. So if they're 3 years old, they're demonstrating 3-year-old language skills. If they're 40, then it's adult language skills. So those are the two areas around which the DAG was originally organized. The goals of the DAG, the original DAG, followed a developmental model. It offered a queuing strategy. The original DAG was in English, and then also was localized into German. When we localized it into German, we kept the same organization, and the content was the same except in the linguistic area, because obviously things in German linguistically, morphologically, syntactically are different than they are in English. So obviously we had to accommodate for that. When the original DAG was out, there were a lot of positives about it. People felt it was thorough. They used it for assessment and tracking progress and planning intervention. It was recommended broadly in presentations, blogs, and social media, and not just from Tobii Dynavox or Vicki Clark. There were some challenges identified, though. People felt that it was difficult to classify the communication ability level. They kept saying, well, my person's not really emergent, but they're not really context dependent either. So they felt that there were some challenges there. They didn't feel like there was enough support for use. There was no way to track progress, and the goals were not always seen as aligning appropriately to some of the competencies. So with that being the case, in 2014, the DAG 2 came out. And the DAG 2 was developed with the same purposes in mind that we talked about before, but with the addition of two other purposes, one being providing a tool to track progress, and the other expanded instructions to help people be more effective in how they use it. The DAG2 maintained the things that were really positive about DAG1. It maintained that organization. A lot of the goals remained the same, but there were some changes. Some of the goals were realigned based on the competencies that they fit with better or were rewritten. And two additional communication ability levels were added. So originally Dowden had emergent, context dependent, and independent. We added transitional independent and emergent transitional. So we added communication ability levels in between emergent, context dependent, and in between context dependent and independent. And the reason for that, again, was because people were finding it difficult to figure out where to put their client. So emergent for us becomes the group that is really at the non-symbolic level, maybe just starting to use a few symbols with maybe reduced some intentionality, but minimally. Emergent transitional is where you're starting to use single symbols. Context dependent remains the same. Independent transitional is where you're seeing more morphology, more syntax, etc. And then independent again remains being at age level for those skills. The other things that were added were additional instructions and tools for tracking progress, and then Spanish was added for the DAG2. You can see on the side some of those tools that were added. In 2017, the DAG was added to Pathways for Core First as more of an interactive tool. There were some changes. The goals were not changed, but the language was simplified a bit. We also, because Pathways was organized around TD Snap's Core First page set, we included terms that were Tobii Dynavox terms, for example, quickfires. There were a few other additions. We added in 4 new literacy goals. There were lesson plans for every goal, and then it was localized into a number of other languages. Again, we received feedback. It maintained all the feedback we had before, but the challenges were still there as well. People felt like the language was a bit too complicated and that the process for using it was too complicated as well. Also, as from 2014 until 2023, there were some things that it didn't include that were now considered best practices. First of all, Light's addition in 2014 of the psychosocial competency wasn't there. And even though they came out the same year, but that's because Light's research came out toward the end of 2014. The DAG2 came out toward the middle of 2014. So it just missed each other. Access is known as being increased, is so important. And so those goals weren't there. Literacy goals were not as represented as they ought to have been. And then also the queuing hierarchy was included use of physical assistance, which we now know is not something that we want to do with our clients. So as a result, we did some updates to DAG3, which is why you are all here today. So let's talk about what those actually are and the feedback that prompted those updates. The DAG3 remains a partnership. It was done between Vicki Clark and the clinical team at Tobii Dynavox. And again, we are thrilled to be working with Vicki. She's just an incredible person to work with and very, very thoughtful about how she does therapy and the things that she creates. The purpose of the DAG3 remained consistent, with the exception that we really have committed to reflecting current research and best practices on an ongoing basis. The DAG3 will likely be updated more frequently than it has. We hadn't updated it since 2014, and so therefore there were quite a few updates that were required based on how we view therapy now. The changes to the DAG3 include the addition of the psychosocial competency, more access goals, more literacy goals. The prompting hierarchy has been changed. We increased readability and usability, provided some simplified activities, have space for personal goals, and removed the Tobii Dynavox terms. Now, I went through that list quickly. Let's look at each one of these. First of all, the DAG3 is a writable document. So when you pull up the DAG3, I will show you where it's located. When you go to the Tobii Dynavox website, you can go to products. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. You go to training and support, and then under training, pick assessment tools. The DAG3 is available under these assessment tools. So if we scroll down, you will see DAG3. You can select that, and then you can download the DAG3, or you can just use it in a PDF form on your computer, or you can use it as it opens on your website. So the DAG3, as I mentioned, is a writable tool, which means that when you open it up, you don't have to print it out, which is fabulous. So we can go in and you can just add in the data that you want. You can type into these little to these text documents or text spaces and change those over time. So that's the DAG3 in terms of its writability. The other thing to be aware of with the DAG3 is that it actually includes also, I'm sorry, my mind just went blank there. The DAG3, includes, I see what happened. So the DAG3 includes within it links to, there we go. Let's see if it's going to work. Nope, of course not. Sorry. I had this the way I wanted it, and now it's not working. All right, so if I go into one of the pages on here, I'm just going to go to page 5. Underneath each of the goals, you see that there's an underlined link. So if I go into that, it will open up a simplified activity that you can use for that particular goal. Pathways had those as well, but they were far more complex and people found them difficult to use. So let me switch back to my PowerPoint, which is what I was looking at a moment ago and was trying to talk about this. So the next thing to be aware of is that we've simplified the instructions in DAG3. Previously, the way that you would use the tool is that you would first begin by looking at what the person's communication ability level is. Are they emergent? Are they emergent transitional? And then you would go to that section of the goals and start there to look at the goals that they have or don't have yet. What we found is that going through this exercise that you're seeing on the screen, where you had to look at understanding and expression, got people very confused. They thought, are these the goals or are they not the goals? Well, they're not, but it was very confusing for people. So what we've done is we've actually simplified how you identify the person's communication ability level. What you do is within the instructions of the DAG, we have a short description, as you can see on the screen, of what an emergent communicator is, the definition, what some of the communication characteristics are, and a case example. This makes it much easier to read through, easier to identify, and less confusing with the goals themselves. So that's something that we think that we've gotten feedback has really been beneficial to people. We have simplified goals in the DAG3, including, so for example, in the past, we had a goal in DAG2 that read, uses a variety of nouns and categories to include 7 categories with 5 examples in each category. That's a lot of words and a lot of numbers, and most people would read that and say, I don't know what that means. In DAG3, it says uses object names from common categories appropriately during daily activities. We've modified how we state the goals to be much more accessible. Another example is that in the old DAG2, it said, use learn sentence constructions, carrier phrases for creative 2-word sentences. I want, I see, I have, in structured or routine activities. It now says, combines a pronoun and action word as a common sentence starter. So we've really tried to limit and make the language much more accessible, not only for us as speech language therapists, but for parents, for others who are working with the DAG. In the DAG3, we have psychosocial goals. We decided not to pull it out and add a 5th competency because we felt like the competency or the skills that are needed to have that psychosocial competency are often coming from other competencies, including the psychosocial one. So what you'll notice is that after certain goals in the social competency, we actually in parentheses state what aspect of the psychosocial skills are being addressed by that goal. So for example, communicates the concept of mine or my over personally motivating objects, etc., has the psychosocial benefit of building communicative confidence. We might have another one about waving, which is the next one down here, where responds to others waving. And the psychosocial benefit is greeting and recognizing social cues. So the psychosocial piece is built in through the social competency within the DAG-3. We also have added a number of literacy goals within DAG-3, which have been vetted by literacy experts in the field. For example, in the emergent section, we have a goal for demonstrates a beginning interest in books by attending for short periods while a partner reads, turns pages, and looks at pictures, etc. What it says then in parentheses after that goal, as you can see here, is literacy print awareness. A goal in the context dependent section is consistently responds to comments or questions during shared reading, even if the response is inaccurate. That is literacy goal being book awareness. And then in the independent section, we have writes, words, sentences, and employees' knowledge of phonics, as well as a range of spelling conventions. Literacy goal there is written expression. So we've tried to include those within the linguistic competency, but we've called them out so that they're easy to find. The access goals are listed, of course, under the operational competency. And you'll see it, basically, those don't have anything indicating that they're access per se, but as you read them, you'll identify them. So for example, one of the goals you'll see would be improves accuracy of making selections during a preferred game or activity using the selected access method. Now, this goal, what we would suggest is if you have a client for whom access is not an issue, you can just select NA, and then you don't address that goal at all. However, the goals have been written here to apply to as many access methods as possible. So although some of them are more specific. So for example, one of them says activates and deactivates the pause button during daily activities. Obviously, that's not appropriate for a touch user, but we know it's very important for those who are using eye tracking or mouse dwell. So we've wanted to highlight that as being a skill that's very important to work on. Other goals include things like adjust the device or their positioning or asks others to do so to achieve better accuracy. So again, if this is not an issue for your client, you can just hit NA and then they don't count one way or the other toward progress. In the DAG-3, we offer a section for personalized goals. We know, first of all, that we will never be able to provide every goal that the client might want to work on or that you might want to work on with your client. We also know that you might want to tweak goals that are in there. So with this one, what you can do, also there may be Gestalt-oriented goals that you want to add. So if that's the case, this personalized goals section gives you a way to do that within the structure that's used within the DAG as a whole. The next area that I want to mention is the modified prompting hierarchy. And on the DAG-2, as you can see on the left side of the screen, yes, I don't do right and left, so I always have to check. You'll see that the bottom cue was physical assistance, brief physical help to select the correct button or picture. And we are aware that that is no longer best practice. That this is something that means that you're assuming that you know that what they want to communicate, and that they want to communicate at all. It removes the opportunity for them to consider what they want to say and where it's located. Moving them to select a button doesn't tell us about their competence. It just is us asking them to comply with what we want them to do. So, we have, as appropriate, removed that prompt from the chain of cues. And the chain of cues then has also been made a little more visual so that it can be taught more easily to other people. Of course, if you have your own chain of cues, you can use that reflected in the DAG as well. Finally, and what I already mentioned, is the simplified activities. We did take the ones from Pathways and look at those, but we have for each goal a simplified activity that's more easily shared with maybe parents or others that are working with the client. We have removed the terms related to Tobii Dynavox from the DAG. So we don't reference topic messages or quick fires anymore. We reference more broadly used terms so that the DAG is truly a device agnostic or tool agnostic resource. Now you might wonder about how the DAG-3 was developed and what process we went through to do that. We began with really focusing in on usability. And so the first thing we did is we researched current thinking regarding literacy. We had conversations with experts. We monitored social media and those kinds of things to really understand how we needed to change the DAG. We then reviewed it and asked ourselves what was missing, confusing, etc. We rewrote, and removed and added goals, as well as reorganizing them. And then we had a review that happened. This was in early 2022. This was an internal cross-functional team that included people from marketing as well as clinical people. We then also included and individuals from around the world, language therapists, educators, and non-clinical people reviewed these goals, how they were written, were they understandable, and later reviewed the instructions as well. We then, based on this feedback, revised the goals and wrote the sample activities. All of this was then reviewed again. This happened in January through March of 2023, and we used two different groups. We used novice clinicians. So we had 5 speech therapists with non-AAC backgrounds who work in pediatric clinics, schools, or hospitals review the DAG. So these are people that just say, I don't do AAC, to see if it's something that they felt they could use and would help their implementation if they were ever in a position where they needed to provide AAC therapy. And they loved it. We also had external experts review it, including Vicki herself, of course, who was part of it, and all of the speech therapists on her staff reviewed it as well. We then revised the DAG-3 again and had a third review with Vicki, her team, and the clinical team at Tobii Dynavox. And finally, to our great relief, it was released August 31st of 2023. So that's the process that we went through. And as you can tell from some of the information I provided about DAG-1 and DAG-2, we're always looking for feedback. So if there's ever you're using DAG-3 and there's things about it you don't understand, you don't like, you think could be better, we really ask you that you would send in that information. Send it to Alice, send it to your account manager from Tobii Dynavox. We would love to hear that because we do intend to continue developing DAG-3. The participants in the reviews, we just wanted you to see just a quick list of those. You can see that there were some in Euro, which includes the UK, and then we had, of course, the novices, and they were all from the US. We had some really nice reviews about the DAG-3 from reviewers. I won't read these for you now, but just to sum them up, people felt like we were providing something that was much easier to use, that they felt they could read it and understand how to do it. It didn't feel as time consuming. It just provided them with a lot more of what we hoped it would. I showed you earlier how you can get DAG-3 from our website. You will also be able to have access to this, a PDF of this PowerPoint, and so you'll have links to the DAG-3 there as well. So I mentioned plans for the DAG-3. We are in process now of localizing DAG-3 into a number of languages. As I mentioned, the organization remains consistent, as do the goals in all but the linguistic section. So if you have a client who has English as a second language, and maybe you want the family to go through and do the DAG in their own language, that's going to be something that you should be able to do over time. Right now, we have just a few that are in process and are further along than others, but they will be posted on the website. The only one that you would have to be aware of would be that linguistic section. And then also, as I mentioned, those ongoing changes that we're going to be doing to reflect current research and best practices, as well as feedback from people about what would make the DAG work better. So now for those of you who have not used the DAG, I'm going to walk through how you actually go about using this this tool. And then I'll be kind of talking about a few different use cases. But the first use case is one where imagine that this is a client who you've seen is a client with autism, and you're going to go through the DAG with them. So we're going to start off from that standpoint. These are the DAG-3 instructions, and I'm going to have to get out of this exit full screen mode, unfortunately, which makes this smaller, and I apologize for that. I was hoping full screen would work, but it didn't. So what you can see with the instructions is that it gives you information about how to use the goals grid. There are also videos that you can look at along the way. So if you're a person who prefers to learn by listening, you can open this video and it will provide some information about how to do it. Oops. Then we get into how to use the DAG-3. You can see step 1 is identifying the communication ability level. And right away, it goes into the opportunities for doing that. So you could read through. For this student, we would, oops, I'm hitting the wrong one. We would read through these descriptions of the communication ability level. So I'm going to go back up here, and I would say, so this is emergent. An emergent communicator may have limited or no understanding that the symbols represent things, places, and ideas, and may not yet have consistent method of communication. So I read through that and I think, yeah, actually, that does sound like my client, maybe. And so if that's the case, I might also read the emergent transitional, but maybe I decide, yes, they're emergent. So at that point, I can continue with the DAG-3, and I can continue to read the communication ability levels if I want, but most likely I would just go on to the next step, which says review the goals. There we go. Review the goals in each competency area and mark the goals that have already been met. And you're going to do this for the communication ability level where the person is, as well as probably the next one, whether there's one below or one above. So at this point, we would switch over to the goals section of the DAG, which is a separate document. So we would switch over to that and then go back to where I'm going to start with linguistic. And I can go back to where the emergent goals are here, and I can start reading through those. And I can say, all right, they select any message or word with or without intent. If I think they do that, I would select goal met, and that's it for that. The next one would be shows preference for symbols that represent motivating items or activities. Maybe they actually need some cues to do that. Maybe they need modeling. Maybe they need a direct cue. So I could select the cueing level where they are. Then I would continue to read the goals and decide that up until I get ones where there's no goal met, and I would just continue to read into the emergent transitional section to make sure that I'm capturing their skills, since we do know that individuals often will have skills that are splinter skills along the way. So we would do that for each of the competencies. The next thing we would do is we would fill out the form that's in the DAG that gives us an idea of where the person is for each of these competencies. The benefit of that is that it helps us understand maybe they're at transitional independent for everything except operational. And that tells us that we really need to focus in on that particular skill level or that particular competency. The next thing we do is it says determine the level of support for each target goal. So this is where, if we don't already know, we could use the chain of cues, or you can use the chain of cues that you use yourself. Finally, we're going to identify our implementation and teaching techniques, and we've given some ideas of things that people who are more novices may not be aware of. Recognizing opportunities, making meaning out of communicative attempts, creating a positive communication environment, modeling, and looking for success. So these are things that people in the AAC world are familiar with, but others may not be. So that's kind of helping them to get a good start with the goals. The next would be to use activities and lessons to practice competency, to fill out the implementation planning and goals progress report. The nice thing about this, and this is in the actual goals section, you can actually copy and paste goals from within the DAG and then paste them in that section of the goals grid. That way you don't have to rewrite them all. The other thing is it actually asks you to select the activities and materials, to name the competency area, what level of prompting, and of course, the criteria. One of the things that we suggest is that you set a criteria that's appropriate for the client, but we know that our clients often vary. So you can see that we're modeling here criteria of maybe 70% or so, but of course that would depend on the client. The other thing that I really love about this planning tool is that it asks you, are they doing it with familiar people, familiar tasks, unfamiliar tasks? All of those are really important because it gives you an idea that we might work on that goal again. We're starting with familiar, we might work on it again for unfamiliar. So it gives us a way of moving forward in our planning. And then finally, you fill out the progress summary each time you assess the person's progress. So let me show you what these look like. We said we have the goals, and I'm once again going to make this a little bit smaller. There we go, just so we can get through it a little faster. So these are the linguistic goals. Forgive me, anybody who gets dizzy when you scroll like this. I'll tell you when it's over, nearly over. Okay, here we go. It's over, the scrolling. So additional goals can go here. So if you're working on, Gestalt language processing with someone, this is the planning and goals progress form, which you can see is something that you can fill out online. You can share that with others as well and compare. And then this is, again, the planning tool. As we continue to go back to the top of this is where you're going to find the progress. And the reason it's at the top is because we want people to be able to look quickly at what's going on with their client. So this gives you a way of noting what % of the goals within a certain communication ability level and competency that person has accomplished. The one thing I would say here is that if you have a goal that's an NA for someone, so for example, they're a touch user, they don't need any work on access, you're not going to include that in the percentages. So this would reflect, let's say there are 7 goals in the emergent linguistic area, and they're not working on access. So now there are 6, and they've accomplished 4 of them. That would give them then 60%. 66%. So this gives you a way of reflecting that progress, and then you can show it over time. You notice that we have the review date here. So I'm going to look at my time. Yeah. I want to share a couple other things about the DAG-3 before I move on. And that is that first of all, I find the DAG incredibly helpful for a number of things, not just for assessment. So when we're using the DAG, we're identifying the communication ability level, we're using their strengths to identify the target goals, determining the level of support, identifying the teaching techniques, using the lessons to build skills, and tracking the progress, as well as then reviewing the progress over time. I think a couple things to keep in mind. I have found personally the DAG-3 very useful for helping to set expectations. I've had times where clients will come in and the family says, I want them to say 4-word sentences, and maybe they're not even using symbols yet. I have found the DAG to be useful to say, let's work on that. That's within this linguistic competency. You really want them to be competent in their linguistic skills, don't you? Let's work on that. And it helps them see that there's a pathway to get there. We also might have people that want to really focus on linguistic, but we realize there's a hole in their skills, maybe in social skills. And this gives teams a way of understanding there are other skills than just maybe sentence formulation that are appropriate to work on. And it gives you a way to form a shared plan around the DAG for what to work on with individual clients. And I think that this is something that we can't underestimate the benefit of that with a tool like the DAG, that it not only gives us that planning, the assessment, the goals that we work on, but it can also be a tool to help teams get on the same page. So I'm going to stop talking to you now. It was 7 minutes left, and I'm going to turn it over to Alice. And are there questions that we can answer, Alice?
Hi, Bethany. Thank you for that.